Welcome along to all strange historians and Beatles fans. This series is called The Strange History of the Beatles. This time around we're going to talk about the strange history of the Beatles song Strawberry Fields Forever. So sit back and pour yourself a cup of coffee, or a tankard of tea, or a mug of mead, or a chalice of cider, or a flagon filled with any beverage of your choice, and join your fellow strange historians and Beatles fans around the campfire. Strawberry Fields Forever is a song by the Beatles, written by John Lennon and released in 1967. Overall, the song structure is pretty complex and unconventional. It's got various musical elements and sounds coming in and out throughout the song, and this contributes to the song's psychedelic and experimental sound, which was groundbreaking at the time of its release. Now let's talk about the title. The title of the song comes from a Salvation Army children's home in Liverpool called Strawberry Field, which was near John Lennon's childhood home. His aunt Mimi recalled, this is a quote from her, "There was something about the place that always fascinated John. He could see it from his window. He used to hear the Salvation Army band playing at the garden party, and he would pull me along saying, 'Hurry up, Mimi, we're going to be late.'" Now let's talk about the inspiration and the writing of the song. So in 1967, John Lennon was living and working in Spain while starring in a movie called How I Won the War. And the production company put him up in a really large house with a garden and a fence. But by his own admission, he was kind of lonely. He wasn't connecting with anybody that he was working with, and he had a sense of nostalgia for home. And so you could just imagine he spent a lot of time daydreaming and reflecting back upon his childhood and days that he spent with friends. It was while in that house in Spain that John recorded the first demos of Strawberry Fields Forever while playing his acoustic guitar. At the time, John Lennon was deeply immersed in Hindu teachings. He was also taking hallucinogenic drugs, which caused him to question his identity and seek to dissolve his ego. Lennon said the song reflected how he felt different all his life, and he kind of called it a psychoanalysis set to music, and one of his most honest songs. And I'll talk about some excerpts from some interviews that he did later on. It's also been said that the lyrics were inspired by poems such as Jabberwocky by English writer Lewis Carroll. So let's talk about the song structure. Strawberry Fields Forever has an unconventional song structure and reflects the experimental and psychedelic influences of the era. The song's composed of several distinct sections that are blended together in a unique and complex arrangement. So let's start off with the introduction. So the song begins with a dreamy psychedelic intro that features a tape loop of a mellotron, which is a haunting flute-like sound, right? And then you get into the verse, right? So the first verse features John Lennon singing about his childhood memories of playing in Strawberry Field. And his vocals are accompanied by acoustic guitar and bass and drums. So he sings, "Let me take you down, 'cause I'm going to Strawberry Fields." This line can be interpreted as a kind of an invitation to escape reality and enter this dreamlike, idyllic world. And then he sings, "Nothing is real and nothing to get hung about." So that line further emphasizes this idea of a dreamlike state where reality is blurred and the speaker is able to let go of their fears and their worries. Now, Lennon was also inspired by childhood memories. You see, his aunt used to tell him, "Hey, John, don't go playing on the grounds of Strawberry Fields." And he would reply, "Why? They can't hang you for it." Right? So that line, from when he was a child, saying, "They can't hang you for it." So he remembers saying that to his aunt when he was a kid, right? So John Lennon, when he wrote this, he must have been, 26 years old, probably? And so here he is thinking of a memory that maybe was 20 years earlier, remembering a line that he said to his aunt 20 years perhaps, maybe a little bit later, from that. So that's where that line came from. And then he sings Strawberry Fields Forever. The next line is, "Living is easy with eyes closed." This line suggests that it's easier, well, sometimes, to live in a fantasy world than to, take on the harsh realities of life, right? And facing these things head on. Now, in an interview in later years, John Lennon said, "It still goes, doesn't it? Aren't I saying exactly the same thing now?" The awareness apparently trying to be expressed is, let's say in one way I was always hip. I was hip in kindergarten. I was hip from the others. I was different all my life. Then John continues to sing the words, "Misunderstanding all you see. It's getting hard to be someone, but it all works out." Now this line suggests that while it can be difficult to maintain a sense of purpose and a sense of identity, things have a way of working out in the end. And then John Lennon says, "It doesn't matter much to me." But does it? And then you got the chorus, right? So the chorus features this soaring melody and a lush instrumental arrangement that includes strings and brass and the distinctive sound of a mellotron. And the lyrics continue to express this yearning for escape, this desire to explore the mysteries of the world. And so he sings, "Let me take you down, 'cause I'm going to strawberry fields. Nothing is real, and nothing to get hung about. Strawberry fields forever." Think about how incredibly visual that is, right? I mean, you listen to these lyrics, right? And so you got these exciting words that in some ways shouldn't be really visual, right? Because he's saying nothing is real, nothing to get hung about. So you have nothing really to put in your mind except what you put in there, right? So there's no picture really being painted except for strawberry fields forever. But that's enough, because you could almost imagine yourself in a field of strawberries that just goes on for infinity. So then you got the second verse, right? So the second verse follows a similar pattern to the first, with John Lennon's vocals accompanied by acoustic guitar and bass and drums. And the lyrics continue to describe the sights and the sounds of strawberry fields and the sense of nostalgia and this longing that this place, this fantastic place in John Lennon's memory, evokes. So he sings, "No one I think is in my tree." What an unusual line that is, right? Because you can't help but visualize a tree, right? Because you just say the word tree and automatically you're going to have an image in your mind. But it doesn't mean a tree at all, right? The line suggests kind of a sense of loneliness, a sense of isolation, because the speaker, the singer, John Lennon, feels disconnected from others. In fact, in an interview in later years, John Lennon said, this is a quote, "While I was too shy and self-doubting, nobody seems to be as hip as me, is what I was saying. Therefore, I must be crazy or a genius. I mean, it must be high or low." In fact, that's the next line in the song. He sings, it must be high or low. That is, you can't, tune in, but it's all right. So, once again, when he sings, "It must be high or low," he may be referring to the highs and lows of fame, the ups and downs that come with being a public figure. And when he says that no one's in his tree, it's because there's nobody else like him. Who was really like John Lennon, as far as, especially at the time? Who was as famous as he was, and who was considered to be, and I know you got the other Beatles, but who was considered to be as weird as he was, right? Because even Paul McCartney was never considered to be weird in the sense that John Lennon was, and John Lennon knew it. And so he says, "No one I think is in my tree. There's nobody like him," right? And it's very difficult for him to relate to people. So he then goes on to say, that is, you can't, tune in, but it's all right. Which could mean that despite the difficulties and pressures of fame that he was dealing with, it's still worth it in the end. Because look at the way he gets to express himself and the amount of joy that he gets to give back to the world. Like he's dealing with all of this misery sometimes, right? I know it sounds awful, with fame and wealth. But at the same time, something good comes from it as well. In an interview in later years, John Lennon said the following, "There was something wrong with me, I thought, because I seemed to see things other people didn't see. I thought I was crazy, or an egomaniac for claiming to see things other people didn't see. As a child, I would say, 'But this is going on,' and everybody would look at me as if I was crazy. I always was so psychic or intuitive or poetic or whatever you want to call it, that I was always seeing things in a hallucinatory way. It was scary as a child because there was nobody to relate to. Nothing my auntie nor my friends or anybody could ever see what I did. It was very, very scary. And the only contact I had was reading about an Oscar Wilde or a Dylan Thomas or a Vincent van Gogh, all those books that my auntie had talked about their suffering because of their visions, because of what they saw. They were tortured by society for trying to express what they were. I saw loneliness. So that's pretty introspective, right? It's pretty fascinating stuff, and I totally understand what John Lennon's talking about, because he's mentioned on more than one occasion, or is referenced. I don't think he knew the word, but it's called synesthesia, and it's something that I have. I've seen videos on it as well. And you think that everybody can see what you see, because you don't know that it's not normal to hear music and see colors all around you, right? And it's like you don't know how to even express that. I don't know how to express that. Or spatial sequence synesthesia, which I've done a video on, where I see time in space, where you could, and other people have it too, some of the people listening probably do, where as you stand here, right, you can see space, you can see time all around you, and you can move through the timeline of your life. And so John Lennon and Paul McCartney actually did an interview recently where he was talking about how certain days have different colors. And so that's part of what John Lennon must be referring to as synesthesia. So anyway, let's continue. So he continues again with the chorus. You already know what that is. And then you've got the bridge. Okay, so the bridge features this sudden shift in mood and this sudden shift in tempo. And suddenly things get a little bit faster, more intense. You've got this great instrumental arrangement. It's more aggressive, right, of a vocal performance from John Lennon. And the lyrics continue to express this sense of frustration and confusion, because you can tell that John Lennon is sort of grappling with his identity and his place in the world. And so then you got verse 3. And that features John Lennon singing about his struggles with isolation and loneliness. And so he sings, "Always know, sometimes think it's me." I mean, come on. That line suggests a sense of confusion or uncertainty about one's own identity. And then he says, "But you know, I know when it's a dream. I think I know, I mean a yes, but it's all wrong. That is, I think I disagree." So you've got this internal dialogue going on where a lot of creative people have conversations with themselves, especially if you're a songwriter, if you're a writer. You kind of work out scenes in your mind. You try a lot of different things. You see how you're going to express yourself. And so here John Lennon is almost having a conversation with himself where he's stepping outside of himself and also talking to himself at the same time. It's amazing lyrics, and amazing what it must have been like to be a musician or a songwriter at the time. And then a song like Strawberry Fields comes out, and you're like, oh my God, I give up. This guy's great. And then you got the chorus, right, which is the same soaring melody and the lush arrangements as before. And in case you don't know, so the chorus is, "Let me take you down, 'cause I'm going to strawberry fields. Nothing is real, and nothing to get hung about. Strawberry fields forever." And then he says, and then the chorus repeats with the same soaring melody and the lush arrangements as before, and then it begins to fade out. Okay, so the song ends with a return to that sort of dreamy, psychedelic intro with the fade out of the Mellotron riff from the intro, which gradually fades out over the final few seconds. And then there's a faintly audible, kind of like these series of comments, right, over the coda. And it's John Lennon saying, "Cranberry sauce, cranberry sauce, cranberry sauce," which some people thought was John Lennon intoning, "I buried Paul, I buried Paul." That's by proponents of the Paul is Dead hoax, which, by the way, I'm going to talk about soon. But anyway, it's a theory that contended that McCartney had died in November 1966 and had been replaced by a lookalike. We'll talk about that later. Anyway, the overall lyrics of Strawberry Fields Forever conveys a sense of longing for escape and a desire to kind of retreat into a world of imagination, a world of fantasy. And so you've got this dreamlike quality, you've got this fantastic, spectacular, really surreal imagery that contributes to that theme, and you got this warm sense of nostalgia, right? Almost a longing for a simpler time, at least in John Lennon's mind. Now let's talk about the music. There's a lot to say about it, but I'll just give you a handful of things. So it's known for its psychedelic sound. Maybe nowadays it doesn't seem so psychedelic anymore, but at the time it was pretty trippy instrumentation, right? You got these backwards tape loops and stuff like that. Obviously, you've heard me talk about the mellotron that's there, and that's an early keyboard instrument. It creates a really distinctive sound. And the mellotron, by the way, was used extensively on the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band album. It's got a heavily processed drum track. It was recorded separately from the other instruments. And John Lennon really wasn't too happy about it. I mean, they were trying all sorts of different things, experimenting in different ways. Lennon's vocal was recorded with the tape running fast, so that when played back at normal speed, the tonality would be altered, giving his voice kind of a slurred sound, right? But he didn't like it. He didn't like it. And he's like, well, maybe I like this part, but I don't like this part. And so let me tell you a little bit about what some of the main people had to say who were involved with it, starting with John Lennon. So he spoke at length about Strawberry Fields as a work of art. Strawberry Fields Forever as a work of art. So in a 1971 interview with Rolling Stone, he said, I think it is the best song we ever wrote. I was just talking about me, Could have been Strawberry Fields Forever. That's all, just me singing about me. I always felt it was about me. It was sort of subconscious. So to me, it was just a nice little tune. And then, almost 10 years later, 1980 interview with Playboy, he said, I was different all my life. The second verse goes, no one I think is in my tree. Well, I was too shy and self-doubting. Nobody seems to be as hip as me, is what I was saying. Therefore, I must be crazy or a genius. So I mentioned this earlier. And back to the 1970 interview, he said, it doesn't resolve into any kind of ending, It goes off on a tangent and never comes back to the main theme. You never know what's going to happen. Overall, John Lennon viewed Strawberry Fields Forever as a deeply personal and introspective song with these great lyrics that reflected his own sense of isolation and security. He also recognized the song's unconventional structure and its importance in breaking new ground for popular music. Now then you get to Paul McCartney. So he's spoken positively about Strawberry Fields Forever on many occasions. He's always praising the song's creativity, its really innovative musical style. And there was a biography in 1997, and McCartney was quoted as saying, I think Strawberry Fields is one of the greatest pieces that John ever wrote. It's one of my favorites of his because it's so evocative. It's like a wonderful dream. And then in 2018, Paul said, this is a quote, you have to remember that in those days there was a very rigid system for writing pop songs. You had to have a verse, then a chorus, then another verse, then another chorus, then a middle eight, and then a solo. But Strawberry Fields didn't conform to any of that. It was just this beautiful flow of words and music that went wherever it wanted to go. It was a real departure for us. So McCartney's really praised Strawberry Fields Forever as kind of a masterpiece of songwriting and a landmark achievement in the Beatles' career. Which brings us to George Martin. He was the Beatles' longtime producer, and he was instrumental in the creation of Strawberry Fields Forever. He also has spoken extensively about the song in various interviews and documentaries. So in 1980, he did an interview with Musician magazine, and he said that Strawberry Fields Forever, and this is a quote, was one of the most remarkable records ever made. And then he goes on to praise its innovative use of studio techniques, including tape loops and other experimental effects. He also noted the song's unconventional structure and its impact on popular music, saying, this is a quote, it wasn't a standard pop record at all. It was breaking new ground. And then in a 1998 interview with Mix magazine, he was saying that it was a challenging but rewarding process working on Strawberry Fields Forever, saying, and so quote, It was very difficult. It took about 55 hours of studio time, which was an enormous amount in those days, but I'm very proud of it. I think it's a remarkable record. And Martin also acknowledged the contributions of the Beatles themselves to the creation of the song, saying in a 2000 interview with PBS, this is a quote, "They were always the catalysts for their own success. I was there to help them, but they were always the ones who would come up with the ideas and say, let's do this, let's try that." Martin recalled, this is a quote, he'd wanted it, this is in reference to John Lennon, he'd wanted it as a gentle, dreaming song, but he said it had come out too raucous. And so he asked me if I could write him a new lineup with the strings. So I wrote a new score with 4 trumpets and 3 cellos. The final recording combined 2 of those versions, which were entirely different in tempo, mood, and musical key. So yeah, overall, George Martin recognized Strawberry Fields Forever as a groundbreaking work of art and credited the Beatles, of course, their creative vision and their experimentation with helping to push the boundaries of popular music. And then, of course, and Beatles fans know who I'm talking about here, and hopefully I'm saying his name right. Is it Jeff? I guess it could be either way. Emmerich? So Mr. Emmerich was the engineer for Strawberry Fields Forever. He has spoken about his experience working on the song and the innovative recording techniques that were used to create its unique sound. So he put together a book. It's called Here, There, and Everywhere, My Life Recording the Music of the Beatles. And he was describing the challenging process of recording Strawberry Fields Forever and the various experimental techniques that were used to achieve the desired effects. And so he notes that the song's final arrangement was a composite of 2 different recordings made at different tempos, and that the final mix involved combining and layering multiple tracks of vocals, instruments, and effects. And so at the end of that year, December 22nd, Martin and Emmerich carried out the really difficult task, nobody would want this job, of joining takes 7 and 26 together. Oh boy. These days, I don't know how easy it would be, probably pretty easy, but back then, they only had a pair of editing scissors. Editing scissors, you guys. Can you imagine? 2 tape machines and a vari-speed control. And so Emmerich compensated for the differences in key and speed by increasing the speed of the first version and decreasing the speed of the second version. He then spliced the versions, starting the orchestral score in the middle of the second chorus. Oh boy. Overall, Emmerich's account of working on Strawberry Fields Forever highlights the innovative spirit and this creative experimentation that was at the heart of the Beatles' approach to making music and the important role that engineering and production played in shaping their sound. Strawberry Fields Forever was released on February 13th, 1967 as a double A-side single with Penny Lane. The song was a commercial success. It reached number 2 on the UK singles chart and number 8 on the US Billboard Hot 100. And the song was included on the Beatles' 1973 compilation album, 1967-1970. It was also known as the Blue Album. My parents had that. The song has been covered by many artists over the years. Not going to list them all, but you can imagine a whole bunch. Time magazine hailed the song as the latest sample of the Beatles' astonishing inventiveness. That's nice. In fact, the writer said this in 1963. I'm going to read it. This is right from that article. The Beatles have developed into the single most creative force in pop music. Wherever they go, the pack follows. And where they have gone in recent months, not even their most ardent supporters would ever have dreamed of. They have bridged the heretofore impassable gap between rock and classical, mixing elements of Bach, Oriental, and electronic music with a vintage twang to achieve the most compelling, original sounds ever heard in pop music. Tom concluded by saying that the multitude of, and this is a quote, dissonances and eerie space-age sounds, end quote, on the track were partly the product of altered tape speed and direction, and commented, and this is a quote, "This is nothing new to electronic composers, but employing such methods in a pop song is electrifying." End quote. The subject of the music video needs to be a whole different production, so I'm going to cover that another time. But basically, the song's music video was filmed in Kent, and it features the band in psychedelic costumes. And the song's been featured in many films and TV shows and commercials over the years. But that music video for Strawberry Fields Forever, wow, that's really something special. But we'll talk about that, like I said, at another time. Let's talk about the influence of the song. In 1996, the song was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame's 500 songs that shaped rock and roll. And the song's been referenced in popular culture numerous times. There was, I think, the movie Forrest Gump and the TV show The Simpsons, which I've never seen. And in 2005, the song was ranked at number 76 on Rolling Stone magazine's list of the 500 greatest songs of all time. And so that's pretty much it as far as the song. I mean, I can continue talking more about it, but that's a good general scoop of the history of the song and how it was put together. I did want to mention, though, that Strawberry Fields is also a 2.5-acre landscape section of Central Park in New York City that is dedicated to the memory of John Lennon. In fact, I'll probably do a show about that as well. The area is located near the Dakota apartment building where John Lennon lived and unfortunately was tragically shot and killed in 1980. Strawberry Fields Forever was groundbreaking for several reasons. First, you've got the innovative production techniques. The song's production was groundbreaking in terms of its use of innovative studio techniques. You've got those tape loops, and you've got backward recording and various speed recordings. And these techniques allowed for the creation of a unique and dreamy sound that had never been heard before. And then you got the psychedelic influences. Strawberry Fields Forever was part of the psychedelic music movement of the late 1960s, and the song's lyrics and musical arrangement reflect this psychedelic influence, with its surreal and the introspective lyrics and this non-traditional chord progressions. And then you've got the non-linear song structure. So the song structure, it's non-linear. It breaks away from the traditional verse, chorus structure of most pop songs, especially at the time. And so this allowed for a more experimental and creative approach to songwriting, which became a hallmark of the Beatles' later work. And then, of course, you've got personal expression. You see, the song's lyrics were deeply personal and introspective. They reflected John Lennon's childhood memories and his experiences. And so this emotional and vulnerable approach to songwriting was groundbreaking at the time, as most songs were. Focused on, things like sex, drugs, rock and roll, cars, love, relationships. And then you've got, Strawberry Fields, which just takes you into a whole other dreamlike world. And so, overall, Strawberry Fields Forever was groundbreaking because it challenged traditional songwriting and production techniques, and it introduced new approaches to music that would influence generations of musicians to come. At this point, I would love to know what you think about the song Strawberry Fields Forever. What kind of images are in your mind when you listen to this song? How does it feel to listen to this song wherever you are, and how have you felt about it over the course of your entire life? I'd be very interested to know your feedback and your thoughts and your feelings about this wonderful, exciting, incredible, groundbreaking song. And so this concludes this episode of The Strange History of the Beatles song, Strawberry Fields Forever. If you enjoyed this video, kindly like and share it. Please subscribe and become a member of my channel. Also, please click on the link below so you can see how you can make a donation directly to me to support my research, and also how you can join me on other platforms where I post exclusive content. Kindly do yourself and animals a favor and be kind to them. And please don't eat them. And please go to a local shelter and adopt a cat or a dog. You'll be very glad that you did. Until next time, I wish you safe travels on all your journeys.